They can't afford to arrest me, even if I was guilty and I was breaking the law, because every time you do that, I'm going to sue you. Now, there was one observation that the chief made to me. He said, "You can't bring these frivolous actions. Why, we'll file an injunction and have you barred from the courts." And I said, "You know, I think you're right, Jim. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sue you twice, and then I'm going to teach 10 other students to sue you twice. That'll give you 20 suits. 20 suits to defend. At some point, you're going to give up and quit in your own self-interest." Now let me show you what we're going to do to Webster County. Webster County is a very poor county, probably has a population of 8,000 or 10,000 people in Missouri. The issue there was over my diplomatic passport. Well, listen, I have several hundred students all over America that are driving on diplomatic passports under Public Law 97-280. Now, excuse me, if you're a law enforcement official here in Colorado, don't get mad at me. I didn't make the law. Congress did. All I'm doing is using a law that Congress enacted for my best interest. So I have a friend of mine, one of my students down in Florida. I said, "Hey, Don, have you got a little time? Could you come up here to Missouri?" He said, "Well, yeah, I'm coming up to class in September." I said, "Listen, bring your pickup with the diplomatic plates on it, and I'd like you to go up to Webster County and park in the sheriff's parking place. Walk in and ask the sheriff if you can park there. And when he tells you no, tell him that's my pickup down there, and if you don't like it, why don't you tow it away?" See what he does. I don't know what the sheriff's going to do, but I think it's going to make him mad. And when the guy goes down and gets in his pickup and backs out of the sheriff's place, and he's got a diplomatic plate on here, here's what they did to me. They arrested me and put me in jail. You think maybe they're going to arrest Don and put him in jail? Now let's test this for a minute. I sued under diversity of citizenship because I'm not a citizen, but Don is. So if Don is accosted in Webster County, where is he going to file his suit?
Did you say Don is a citizen?
Yeah, Don's a citizen.
He's got diplomatic plates?
Yeah, he's got diplomatic plates because what he's working on is Public Law 97-280. He's saying, I've got a free exercise issue here with Statute 96-1211. So I'm a citizen of the Kingdom of Israel, and I've got a right to do this. Well, we'll test it and find out how it's going to come out. He's going to file the action in Florida. So I called another friend of mine who lives in Houston, Texas, and I said, "Mark," I said, "what are you doing?" "Well, gee, I'm going to come to class in September." I said, "Why don't you go up and park in the sheriff's spot?" What's going to happen to Webster County if they continue this process? How long do you think Webster County Sheriff Bill John is going to arrest my students and put them in jail? Is it going to be once, twice, 3, 5, 9, 11? And every one of these guys files a suit for $1 million, $2 million against the county. How long do you think it'll be before the insurance underwriter comes down and says, "What in the hell is going on in Webster County, Missouri? Population 10,000. Who we have never had a claim in 25 years, and all of a sudden now we have a claims bill that rivals St. Louis, Missouri. And guess where they have to defend? Houston, Texas, Orlando, Florida. I got a friend out in Los Angeles, California. He's in Santa Ana. I said, "Well, could you come out here and test this?" It was like I said, I'm just going to sue him once. And I'm going to have you sue him once, and you sue him once, and you sue him once, and I'll bet you at some point in time, when somebody walks in and says, "I'm parked in your space, Sheriff," he's going to say, "Well, go ahead and stay there. I'm not going to arrest you, and I'm not going to tow your car away, and I'm not going to mess with you." At some point in time, even though he hates you and doesn't believe in anything that you're doing and would like to kill you, he'll restrain himself in his own self-interest. Well, that's what civil rights is all about, and that's what that program is designed to teach. Let's take our 10-minute pause right here, and we'll be right back. Don't go away, folks. There's more to come. All right, we're on again. Let me give you my name and address so that you'll have it on the tape. My name is George Gordon, and I'm at Post Office Box 297 in Isabella, Missouri, 65676, and my telephone number is 417-273-4967. Now let's talk about income tax. Probably the most popular class that I teach in law has to do with the income tax. Income tax affects everybody. You don't have to be paying the tax. You're still under the tax as a taxpayer. The fact that you haven't filed or paid the tax simply means that at some point in time the government's going to catch up with you, and if they do, they may or may not take pretty drastic action. Pretty drastic action can amount to civil penalties. They can come in and take your cars, houses, businesses, bank accounts, stocks, bonds, negotiable instruments, etc. This is the typical methodology. Or they can actually put you in prison for a period of years. Typically for willful failure to file, it's 1 year for every act, that is each year you didn't file. Or sometimes they'll get you for conspiracy or for tax evasion, conspiracy to defraud the government of its revenue or something on that order, which are felonies, and they'll lock you up for 5 years. Now that's a pretty heavy trip for not paying the income tax. Now I don't want to stampede you. I'm not here to tell you better come to tax class in the morning or you're going to go to jail, because the reality of it is that as of July 9th, 1986, I believe it was, Roscoe Eggers, who at that time was the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, made this statement to... You can't hear me? Is it because the PA isn't on or because I'm not talking loud enough?
It sounds like the PA is on.
Was this on before?
No.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Can you hear me all right?
I can't put
And nobody else can? I don't know.
put this right here.
Oh, all right. I don't mind it. Can you hear me a little better now?
Yeah.
I guess this microphone is picking it up now. All right, now where was I? Roscoe Eggers, 1986, July 9th, I believe it was, when he pointed out that 34 million people hadn't filed their taxes by July 9th, 1986, or 85, which triggered this Tax Reform Act of 1986. You see, you've got a $200 billion a year deficit. Now you've got 102 million taxpayers, and a third of them don't pay their taxes. They don't file every year. That's what's happened. Now those people are not tax protesters. A tax protester is a civil disobedient who has made an announcement that I'm not going to pay my taxes and neither should you. Now that's what a tax protester is. And the IRS tells us that there are only about 28,000 of those people running around on the streets of America. The rest of these people simply aren't filing or aren't paying. They're working in the underground economy, or for one reason or another they didn't file, but maybe their withholding had already come out of their paychecks, but they didn't file. But it's a pretty significant amount of money, $200 billion a year, which is about a fifth of the national budget. And it's a pretty significant shortfall every year, and so they made a tax reform that they thought would solve the problem. As far as I can see, the tax deficiency is still about $200 billion a year, isn't it? So I don't think they've made much of an inroad into it, even though they had an effective tax increase. Now, the income tax is simply the civil law opposite to the tithe. Many churches will tell their members that they have to tithe and pay an income tax. That's preposterous on its face. You either owe a tax or a tithe, but you don't owe both. A tax is a legal term, and it's the act of doing homage or obeisance to your master. So when you're paying your income tax, you're doing homage to your master, to your sovereign, to your God. That's all it boils down to. Now, no man can serve two masters. Do you remember that old adage from Sunday school in Matthew 6:24? Now remember, the Scriptures, the Bible, is the basis of Anglo-Saxon administration. Even though the United States government doesn't follow Anglo-Saxon administration, if I want to follow it, the free exercise clause of the First Amendment is the protection that I need to practice the law of Moses. So I tithe, I don't pay an income tax. The income tax takes 17 to 75% of my creativity and productivity. The tithe only takes 10%. Whether I make 10,000 or 100,000 is not relevant. Whatever it is I make, it only takes 10%. But when you pay an income tax, it takes 17% of 10,000 or 75% of 100,000. So I didn't want to pay $75,000 out of my 100,000. I only wanted to pay 10. So I'd have a different legal methodology whereby I could pay my tax. So when somebody says to me, well, you don't pay your taxes, who told you I didn't pay my taxes? I pay my tax every year. Only I pay mine on a monthly basis, just like you do with withholding. If I make a certain amount of money, I tithe on that certain amount of money. Now that brings me under the free exercise clause of the First Amendment, which is construed by Seeger versus U.S. And I think it's important that you take a look at the income tax from the perspective of the free exercise clause, because remember I mentioned there's only 3 legitimate defenses to the income tax. It's either going to be reliance, that is, I relied in good faith upon an attorney or an enrolled agent or a certified public accountant who gave me the information that I acted on. Or the Aiken subjective good faith, which is I read Irwin Schiff's book and I believed that I wasn't a taxpayer. Or religious free exercise, which simply says I practice another law pursuant to Public Law 97-280 or the free exercise of the First Amendment, free exercise clause, which exempts me from the tax or modifies the tax in some way. Now I'll give you a couple, 3 examples over here. For instance, the Amish people don't pay Social Security. You've probably heard that. Maybe you do, maybe you didn't know that. Are you aware that Seventh-day Adventists do not go into the Army? So you can have a war, but Seventh-day Adventists aren't going to go off and fight it for you.
No, they go in the Army. They're conscientious objectors.
I don't think they go in the Army. I think they take what's called alternative service, don't they? Last I heard. See, they'll go to work for St. Vincent de Paul or Goodwill or somebody like that. The Amish don't do any of the above. In other words, different groups have different methodologies for what normally is called evading the law. Actually, it's not an evasion of the law. It's compliance with the law or the exception to the law. And nearly every law has some form of exception to it. Now, you notice when you fill out your tax return that there is a section in there that says exemptions. Well, an exemption is a congressional grant of grace. In other words, Congress is saying, we're going to give you a grace here. We're going to give you a benefit. Well, I don't want to deal with exemptions. I want to deal with immunities. So I'm immune from the tax, not exempt from the tax. And the reason I'm immune is because I practice the free exercise clause. Now, the Seventh-day Adventist comes along and he says what he wants is an exemption from military status called conscientious objector status. I'm not seeking an exemption, I'm seeking immunity. To do that, I have to do something different that can be recognized by the law. So the judge comes along and he says to me, well, now, what are you doing? I can't sit there and say to him, well, I'm taking the Fifth Amendment. I ain't talking. See, my duty is to inform him clearly and concisely as to my theory of the case. And this is called the burden of going forward. So I have a burden of going forward to show the judge that I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and that's why I'm not going into the Army, I'm not going to war. Or that I'm an Amish man, and that's why I'm not filing my Social Security and paying over the tax. Because I'm either exempted or I'm immune. Now, I seek immunity rather than exemption. Now, I pointed out to you that there was a key case in here called Diefendorf versus Goliath. Let's review that for a moment. Maybe 2 or 3 of you didn't catch this. The income tax in the final analysis, income is necessarily the product of the joint efforts of the state and the recipient of the income. So the income tax is the state cutting its share from a joint venture. You're in a partnership. All right? So if I want immunity, then I can't be in the partnership. If I want exemption, then I want to be a part of the partnership, but I don't want to specifically perform like the rest of the people. Now let's take a look at a few exemptions. Let's say you're working for a company and it's an equal opportunity employer. And one of the employees is in a wheelchair. And because that employee is in a wheelchair, he's not expected to pick up 100-pound sacks and stack them on the pile, but you are. So he's exempted from the requirement that the rest of the workers in this area are all required to perform. He's not immune. He's an employee. He pays his taxes, collects his paycheck, but he doesn't have to perform the same work duties. And the reason for that is, this is an equal opportunity employer, so you can't deny employment to the fellow because he's in a wheelchair. But by the same token, he can do the paperwork, he can do all of the rest of the duties over here, but there's one duty that he can't do. He can't pick up these 100-pound sacks. So somebody else has to do it. So he has an exemption. Well, I want an immunity. I don't want to pick up those 100-pound sacks either. So I'm going to waive my right to employment, and I'm not going to become an employee, so therefore I'm not going to pick up the sacks, but I can't collect my paycheck, and I don't have any status here as an employee. All right, so as I walk in here today, I'm not a citizen of the United States, and I'm not a resident of Colorado or any of the other municipal corporations. I don't have a green card, and I can't work here. I can trade and exchange. I have occupancy jurisdiction as a denizen, but I don't have any capacity to come in here and compete with the rest of you inmates in this mental hospital called Colorado. See, I'm barred from that. That's all right, because I wanted the immunity anyway. I want to be immune from your taxation. I want to be immune from your laws. So I can't participate in any of your benefits. See how that comes down? Now, the income tax, then, is the product of the joint efforts of the state and the recipient of the income. So I'm not putting in any efforts with the state. So I'm not involved in a joint venture with the state of Colorado, so I'm not entitled to any of the benefits. But I'm also not expected to pay in my fair share or to perform any specific duty. Now, the state furnishes the protection necessary to enable the recipient to produce, receive, and enjoy the income, and a tax thereon, in the last analysis, is simply a portion cut from the income and appropriated by the state as its share thereof. So I'm not engaged in any profit-making enterprise. Therefore, the state isn't entitled to their share thereof. See how simple that is? Now, if you too say, I don't want to be subject to the income tax, well, then there's some things that we're going to have to do. Now, over the years, I've done 326 students. This is from 1985 through 1990, which is nearly 6 years. Out of this number of students, 10 of them have gone to jail. And 316, no jail. If you want to join this rank of people, this group of people who don't pay the income tax, who have expatriated under the 14th Amendment or taken their 14th Amendment national citizenship and chucked it, and you don't want to go to jail, and you don't want to lose your toys, can't hear me again? I either got to yell for you guys or I got to speak in the microphone, I guess. I don't know, is this on?
Yeah, but it has nothing to do.
This one has nothing to do with being able to be heard. I guess I ought to talk a little louder. Of the 316 over here who haven't gone to jail, there's two other objectives, though, that you have to take into consideration. One is called your toys. See, you people have worked all your lives now, and you have condominiums and houses and automobiles and stocks and bonds and all these toys that you've paid your taxes on over the years, and you have accomplished a certain level of productivity. And the government now, because they were your partner for all these years, and you didn't pay them what you owed, now they're saying to you, well, if we find out, then we're going to come take it away from you. So they take your toys, they take your houses and cars and your jobs and businesses. Our employment. In other words, you all know that if you are unemployed, you got a right to go to job service, and job service will get you a job. And if they can't find you a job, then you're entitled to food stamps and welfare or some other benefits that the state offers so that you can eat, go to Safeway and buy something. Well, I'm not entitled to any of that. So since I'm not entitled to any of that, then I have to be able to make my living in some other form. So number one, you want to stay out of jail. Number two, you want to save your toys. And number three, you have to go out and make a living. And if we can't accomplish those three indicia, you can't drop out of the income tax, can you? Because you have to live, don't you? In other words, you've got to have a methodology whereby you can provide your 3 squares or your 3 hots and a cot. All right, now that's what we cover in the tax class. Now, expatriation is not the only methodology for accomplishing this. It's just that over the past 13 years, as I have discovered one new level of law, I keep climbing up the ladder, and as I progress along, I find that sometimes there's a better methodology. It's like anything else in life. Whatever your business is, you've discovered over the years there's a shorter, simpler, better way for you to accomplish your goal. And so you go to that next level or that next step and you do your job a little bit differently. Now, I showed you the other day in the Rachel Templeton case that the courts see you each and every time that you appear as a taxpayer if you're a citizen. So the first thing that the judge looks for, here's the first thing the IRS officer looks for, is your Social Security number. What's the second thing he's looking for? The bank account. So it's obvious that I can't have a bank account and I can't deal with a Social Security account, because if I did, I'd be a taxpayer. Now, Congress recognizes that there are some people out here who are called non-taxpayers. They did this in Stewart versus Chinese Chamber of Commerce. And it's a fact, it's a legal fact, that most people in the tax protest movement have picked up on, but they have misconstrued the statute. They assume that they're not taxpayers by making an assumption. They don't know what causes taxpayer status. What causes it is the contract between you and the government. Once you've signed the contract, you've volunteered. Now, you all know that the military is voluntary, don't you? So, you can't draft me into the Army, but I could volunteer into the Army. Now, once I volunteered and I become a soldier, what goes on in the Army is no longer voluntary, is it? When the sergeant tells me to peel potatoes, then I peel potatoes. If he says go to sleep, then I go to sleep. He's my guardian, and he's going to tell me what to do and how to do it. Same thing is true here with the income tax. You've probably heard that the tax is voluntary. And that's true, it is. But once you've signed up for your Social Security number, you have become a taxpayer. You've signed a double indemnity Tontine insurance wagering policy in which you seek to make a profit. And it's a 3 or a 4-party limited general partnership. One is called the employer. Number 2 is called the employee. This is called the master at the common law. This is called the servant at the common law. The third over here is called the government, who is called the king. Now, the king is the master guardian of both the employer and the employee, the master and the servant. And it's not something new that just came along. It's always been that way. It's simply an operation of law for which George Orwell pointed out to you in 1984 that it's called doublespeak. And so what we do is we change the name from a slave to an employee. Now, you see, if I walked in here and I said, well, all you people are is a bunch of slaves and bondservants in here. See, I'd offend you if I did that. But if I come in here and I say, oh, look at all of these employees. Who do you work for? See, you...
No one right now.
Unemployed. An unemployed bondservant. See, you're not offended because this term means that you work for somebody, and that's not something that's derogatory necessarily, but it shows you where your status is. Now, if you're an employer, then you're a master. More people would prefer to be masters than servants. But it doesn't make any difference. This master is still the servant of the king. And so this is, as a matter of law, a three-party limited general partnership. And this partnership has duties and responsibilities. So the king furnishes the Social Security, unemployment insurance, workman's compensation, daycare centers, public school, free school lunches. The employer furnishes the workplace, the truck to drive, the customers who are shipping freight. And you come along as the truck driver. And all three of you are engaged in this partnership for the purposes of making profit and gain. And the king comes over and calls these dollars. You're paid in dollars, the government collects its tax in dollars, and the employer bills and collects its revenues in dollars. In England, they do it in pounds. In France, they do it in francs. Now, I come along on the scene and I say, I don't want to participate in any of this. You're all familiar with the way you're making your living today. I want to do something different. So I come along and I say, gee, what is it about this income over here that makes me liable to the tax? Well, here's my contract, and now the dollar comes in, and in order for me to use the dollar, that is to spend it, I have to take the dollar into the store. But where did I get the dollar? Well, I got the dollar from my employer. Where did he get the dollar? Well, he got it from the king. And it was the employer and the employee who have come to the king, the third party in the limited general partnership, to get the medium of exchange for which they can do business. And there's three parties to the limited general partnership. So the king is simply saying to you that my part which is cut off is my commission. So if you were a salesman, you would expect to be paid a commission, wouldn't you, for making a sale? Well, the king has delegated to the Federal Reserve Corporation the power to make these dollars. The Federal Reserve is simply collecting then its commission for settling debts among and between the employees and the employers. So when you go into Kmart, you don't have any way with which to trade with them. If you want to test this, walk into Kmart and tell them, I want to buy that watch, but I don't have any money. I don't have any dollars. What can I do for you to get that watch? Can I sweep the floor? I think they'll say no. Can I screw in light bulbs? Can I stock the shelves? Can I work for you? I really want that watch. I think they're going to say no. Well, what is it that I have? Could I give you Mexican pesos? I've got 30 million Mexican pesos. Can I think they'll tell you no. I have gold. Will you take gold? I think they'll tell you no. You see, they have a contract with the state. Their business requires that they keep strict accounts. And there are statutes that require Kmart to keep records and books. And the records and books have to be kept in the lawful money of account of the United States because they're a chartered corporation. And the lawful money of account in the United States is the Federal Reserve note, and has been for the last 10 or 15 years. Used to be gold and silver, but it's not anymore. Now, you could give him a $50 gold piece, but he's only going to give you $50 credit, and it cost you 400 Fed notes to get the $50 gold piece, so that's not a very good transaction. A $50 watch costs you 400 Fed notes, so you'd be better off to give him the Federal Reserve notes. But watch this. The moment you give this guy the 50 Federal Reserve notes and walk out of the store with the watch, you've incurred a tax liability, because now you have taken the watch in a commercial trade, and now the guy that gave you the $50, the Federal Reserve Bank says, well, I want my commission. So he collects his commission off of both the employer and the employee, that is the customer who goes into the store. Now, that's really all you're dealing with. It's really fairly simple. So you say to yourself, well, gosh, how am I going to be able to do business? And the answer is privately. It has to be private business. So in my classes, I charge in gold. So when you ask me what's the value of my class, it's 2.5 ounces of gold, which in today's marketplace is roughly $1,000. So if you said, well, how much is your newsletter? Well, it's approximately 4 ounces of silver. Well, how much is this book over here? Well, it's approximately 5 ounces of silver. Now I'm dealing in property. Now watch how many people are going to be involved in the transaction. A lady down there said, I want to come to class, and I said, bring me 8 ounces of silver. Isn't that what we agreed on? Was it 8? She walked in, she gave me 8 of these. Let me give you what this is. She gave me 8 of these. She's here today, and she's paid me. She's the only one in here that paid me. All the rest of you people have discharged. There's 3 parties involved in your discharge today. You, me, and the Federal Reserve Bank. And the Federal Reserve says to me, well, George Gordon, now that you accepted these $50 from this guy, then I want you to pay me a commission. But you see, the income tax, they come along under this new tax law, and they've given us a little bigger advantage, something bigger than we had, I'll say, in 1960. Remember, in 1960, you had a $600 exemption. Well, now it's $5,600 or $8,900 for married couple. So I can take 8,900 of these Fed notes without making a report to the United States, because they told me I could. See, here again, I didn't make the law. They made the law. So I can take this many in 365 days. So just keep that in mind, that if you take this many Fed notes in that period of time, you're within the scope of the law. So I never take more than this 8,900.
What about the self-employment tax?
Okay, I'm not self-employed, sir. I'm not an employer. I'm a trader. See, I don't have a Social Security number, and I don't have a federal tax ID number. So when somebody says, well, you look like you're self-employed, well, what makes you think I look like I'm self-employed? See, it's a matter of semantics again. They'll ask you, are you self-employed? And out of your own mouth you say, yes, I am. Well, now you owe a Social Security self-employment tax, because an employer and an employee are co-partners in a limited general partnership. So the presumption then is that you're an employer under contract. I'm not under contract, so I'm not an employer, and I'm not an employee, and I'm not a bondservant, nor am I a servant. I'm a trader. And I made myself a trader by rescinding my Social Security account, expatriating from the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment's quite a little story over here, but there's 7 ways to expatriate your citizenship. One can be a general expatriation, or you can simply be naturalized by another government, which is what I did. And in the process, I've given up my citizenship in the United States openly and notoriously. But I never surrendered my nationality. So I was born here just like a Navajo Indian. Now, a Navajo Indian does not have to be a citizen of the United States. He can be born in New Mexico. If he stays on the reservation and he never gets a Social Security number or a birth certificate, and if mom and dad never got a marriage license from the United States or the state of New Mexico, then he's a denizen. You can't deport him. His nationality is Navajo, and he was born here on the North American continent, and as a matter of international law, you are a national. You ever notice they use the term citizens or nationals? See, I'm a national. I'm not a citizen. Now, I've got some rights, privileges, and immunities, but I don't have other rights, privileges, and immunities. I have no commercial benefit, but I still have all of the rights, benefits, and immunities that a national is entitled to under the law of nations. So you can't deport me from the United States. Now, by the same token, I can't be an anarchist or some lawless fellow who goes out here and takes benefits and then doesn't pay his fair share. Sometimes people will say, well, you use our roads. Well, excuse me. Doesn't the fellow from France who comes over here, or England, or Germany, or Mexico, doesn't he use your roads? And are you angry with him because he doesn't have a driver's license or register his car here? Excuse me. Doesn't he buy gasoline down here at the local gas station? And isn't that the way you fund your highway construction program, is with the gasoline tax? Doesn't he then contribute to the building and the maintenance of your highways every time he buys a gallon of gas? Why would you be angry with me? See how simple that is? Some guy comes along and he says, well, here you are living in a motel. My God, didn't I pay my rent here? And doesn't this motel, as a corporate person and a citizen of the state, don't they pay a portion of what I paid them to the state for the support and maintenance of your street lights and your sewers and your water system here? Well, didn't I pay my fair share? So the only thing you really have to complain about is that I'm not paying for national defense, I'm not paying for welfare and food stamps and unemployment and all the rest of these social benefits. But then what's your bitch? I'm not entitled to any of them. I have 2 little girls, and they're not going to the public schools because they don't have birth certificates, and I'm not a citizen, and we don't have any right to your public schools. So I'm not going to use your public schools. I'm going to educate them at home. Got a problem with that? It doesn't cost you anything, and you may say, well, you're an incompetent. Why, those little girls are going to grow up to be stupid. What do you care? What business is it of yours? So the Gordon girls are stupid. So they can't add and subtract. So what? Does that bother you? If they can't add and subtract, that's their problem in life, not yours. You can add and subtract. When they come into your store to buy a candy bar, you can cheat them because they won't be able to figure out the change. That's no problem to you. It's a problem to them. And if when they get to be 25 years old, they get tired of being cheated, maybe they'll want to learn how to add and subtract. Or did it ever occur to you that maybe I could teach them to add and subtract? Maybe I'm really just a sleeper. I'm not as dumb as I look. We got 10 minutes. Let's take a look at citizenship over here because it's an important topic for you to consider. Everybody is a citizen, and everybody says that he wants his citizenship. How many of you people are proud to be Americans? See, you're happy, you're contented, you've been to the public schools. Now let me ask you this question. You're a citizen, and I was a citizen for many years. What does citizenship give you? There must be a reason for it. How many of you want to give it up? Throw it away. Let the record, oh, there's 2, 4. You have it now and you want to give it away. The question arises, like any other business decision that you need to make. And you know, about 600,000 Americans leave the United States and they go to other countries in the world. Did you hear what's going on over in Iraq? They got, is it 600 Americans or is it 3,000?
8,600.
I forgot, it's a bunch anyway. Why in the world would American citizens want to live in Iraq? Isn't that a crazy place to live? And there was a bunch more in Kuwait, and there was a bunch of Filipinos. I was watching the news the other day, and God, there was 75 or 80 Filipinos that were caught in Kuwait. What in the world would a Filipino want to be living in Kuwait for? Did it ever occur to you that maybe he wanted to work there? So Americans leave the United States, and they work all over the world. And many of those people will take up citizenship in some other country. And you ask yourself, gee, I wonder why they would do that. One time I had this guy was really unique. He's a flight engineer on Pan American, and he lived in West Berlin. But he flew out of New York City to Rio de Janeiro. Isn't that preposterous? Now, you know as well as I do that that's insane. That anybody in his right mind who works in New York City for an airline would want to live close to the airport, wouldn't he? So he could just walk over to the job and get on the airplane, fly, come back, and take his days off. No, this guy has to commute from West Berlin, has to commute from Frankfurt, really, to New York. And he has to do this 4 times a month. He does 1 trip a week. 4 times a month he has to commute from West Berlin. Why was he doing that? Well, the United States and Germany have a tax treaty. This fellow is a U.S. citizen. But under the terms of the U.S.-German tax treaty, if a fellow resides in West Germany, he'll be taxed at West German rates. West German rates are a little less than the U.S. rates, but in West Berlin there's no income tax at all because it was surrounded by the communists, remember? And in the event of war, those people would be taken captive in the first 10 minutes. So to encourage those people to stay behind the Iron Curtain in this enclave called West Berlin, the West German government gave them a tax advantage and says, you can live here and work here and we won't tax you here. How's that? So that's what kept a lot of people in West Berlin. Now, where's this U.S. citizen living? In West Berlin, in West Germany, under a tax treaty, and he's doing this for a tax advantage. So he works for Pan American. He's paid $100,000 a year and pays no income tax. Is there something wrong with that? See, he's simply using the law to his advantage. Now, citizenship can have its advantages or it can have its disadvantages because, you see, if he lived in the United States, he would have to pay his U.S. income tax on $100,000 of income in New York City. What do you think they'd charge him? Well, New York City has a 6% income tax. And then the state of New York would come in and tax that $100,000 to some degree. I don't know what it would be, but it'd be $5,000 or $10,000. And then the U.S. government's going to come in and tax it, and they're going to take another $20,000 or $30,000 at least. He would be lucky if he ended up with $50,000 a year living in New York City, but he could live in West Berlin and pay nothing, have the whole $100,000. But it's a little less convenient. You know, if he wants to shop at Saks Fifth Avenue, he has to commute back to New York, or, you know, on his way through, I guess he could buy a little something and take it back home. Have you ever asked yourself, what are the advantages or the benefits of citizenship? Well, number 1, you can vote. And number 2, you can hold office. Number 3, you're entitled to public schools. And number 4, you're entitled to employment. And number 5, you're entitled to all the social benefits. This is really the number 1 item because there's 108 of these. Anybody think of anything else?
Can you take books out of the library if you're not...
Yeah, if you had a library card, but I wouldn't get a library card because that brings me under the statutes. For instance, in Idaho, there's a $300 fine and 6 months in jail if you get caught stealing a book. I didn't want to subject myself to that potential penalty. So I thought, hell, I'll just go get somebody else to go check the book out for me and let him go to jail if I don't give him back the book.
International protection.
Yeah, you get defense. Passport. How many of you vote? Anybody? How many of you actually vote for a winner? You vote for winners? Then you have to be a left-wing radical social, doesn't she? To vote for a winner. Yeah, all the guys I voted for lost, you know, like George Wallace. How many of you have ever held public office or desire to hold public office? I never wanted to, and I don't intend to, but when you expatriate, you give up your right to become President of the United States. That's a fact. So you want to count the cost before you opt out. How many of you want to use the public schools? Do you care about it one way or the other? How many of you want employment? You want to work for General Electric or General Motors? How many of you want social benefits such as welfare, food stamps, aid to families with dependent children, any of those things? There's 108 of them. How many of you want national defense? This guy wants national defense. You want national defense?
What,
Yeah, I don't want it.
what do you mean by national defense?
Aircraft carriers running up and down the Pacific. All these Marines going over here to fight to make Kuwait safe for democracy.
That's more you.
Yeah, and catch bandits and things. Did you want that? Do you want to buy it? Do you want to pay for it? Do you need it? It's tragic, but let me tell you, it doesn't make any difference where you live on this planet. The United States government is going to make Kuwait safe for democracy, whether you're a West German, a Coloradan, or an Argentine. They're simply going to do it, and they don't need your citizenship or your nationality. Do you want a passport? Anybody in here need a passport? You're traveling pretty regularly? This is a pretty neat benefit, this passport over here. It isn't a bad thing to have. It's neat. It's like a credit card. When you run out of money, you just walk in, put it on the counter, everybody takes it, gives you room, food, etc. These people here at the hotel, they're shocked. When I checked in, they said, "Do you have a credit card?" And I said, "No, I'm a deadbeat. I don't have any credit." And this girl looked at me like I was Mork from Mork, and she said, well, you have to have a credit card. I said, "I think somebody else paid the bill for me. Would you check and find out? Maybe he didn't pay." "Oh, you're with this Congress. Oh, yes, your room is paid for, but we still have to have the deposit." "Oh, okay. What do you want?" I reached in my pocket and I said, "Can I give you an ounce of gold?" And she said, "No, the deposit's $50. Do you want Australian dollars, New Zealand dollars, American dollars, Canadian dollars? What do you got?" "I've got any of the above." She says, "Oh, I've got to have U.S. dollars." Okay. So I gave her $50 U.S. for the deposit. Now, a credit card is really a neat vehicle. I'll admit that. I used to have 28. I had to carry a separate wallet on this side over here to carry all of my credit cards. I didn't have any money. I just had a lot of credit. But now I don't have any credit. I just have money. So you have to decide what you want, credit or money. I thought money was a better idea. Do you know that only 2 people raised their hands, and that was over defense? Hell, the Beatles are living in New York, ain't paying you a quarter for national defense, and they're getting defended too, aren't they? Yep. Hell, the Saudis are getting defended. How much have they paid lately?
This international bankers skinned them out of quite a bit.
The Arabs? I thought they were getting paid pretty handsomely for their oil.
I thought David Rockefeller got a good chunk of it.
Oh, no. They're going to be screwed, and they are going to be the screwees. But the screwers have not screwed the screwees yet. That's coming a little later. They ain't found out what's going to happen to them yet. They probably have a pretty good idea. Yeah, they're going to lose all their oil. But they still have it. And they're not paying for national defense. Neither am I. So here I come along, and I get all these benefits over here, you know. Passport. Hey, man, I don't need a passport to travel. I can do that on a family Bible. Did you know that? I could do that on an affidavit, an asseveration, a family Bible, a passport, or a birth certificate. So I rescinded my birth certificate. I never had a passport, and I don't need one. And I don't need a U.S. passport to travel. Come to find out, the United States government, in their wisdom, has made another provision for people like me. You could just use a family Bible. So we tested this. We had a lady one time, about like you, had a little girl, 4 years old, wanted to go to Australia. She went to the Australian consulate, got a letter of introduction so that nobody would bother her on the other end, came back to the United States, showed them their family Bible, go right on through, and they never even searched her suitcase, but they got everybody else's with a passport. Got that? I don't know why they didn't search her passport. I haven't voted for any winners anyway, so there's no need for me to vote, and I don't want to hold public office, so it's irrelevant to me. I don't want to use the public schools. In fact, I think that's a problem rather than a solution. I don't need any employment, and when I was employed, they taxed me $200,000 a year. So I thought, well, I could better put that $200,000 a year to some other service or use. I don't want any of the social benefits because they're worth only $28,000 to me when I get to be 65 years old. And I figured that I was smart enough to make $28,000 or $371 a month between the time I'm 61 and 65 and 72. I figured I could probably do that. And if I can't, just let me starve. Does it bother you if I starve to death? Would you be offended?
At this moment, it may change.
Okay. Would it distress anybody in here if I couldn't pay my rent? If I had to live under a bridge, would any of you people cry and be sad? Would you do me a favor? Butt out of my life and let me starve and let me live under the bridge in peace and stop feeling sorry for me? Would you do that? Let George take care of George, and you take care of you, ma'am. If you could take care of you, you'd be doing a hell of a big job. Now, want to know something? I don't want to take care of you. And I don't want to take care of you either. I just want to take care of me. And I can do a hell of a job of taking care of me. But you know what bothers me is trying to take care of all the rest of you people in here. And my government came along and they said they wanted to take $200,000 a year from me and give it to all of you people over there. And that really offended me. I ain't been the same since. And if you came to me and wanted me to do that job again, I wouldn't be the same from now on. But now that I opted out over here and I'm no longer involved in the tax-paying portion of it, you can keep all your social benefits, ma'am. I want to give you my share of the food stamps. Would you take them? Jesus. Now, let me give you an extra public school teacher or two to take home with you tonight. Got that? You had a question down there, ma'am?
I was wanting to know on the passport, you did mention that in your 1 hour talk, to go with family Bible or birth certificate, do we have to give up our citizenship?
No. See, Title 8 of the U.S. Code simply spells out the methodology by which you can show that you're a U.S. national. Now, your government tells you that you have to have a passport. In fact, they've now tied that to the income tax. You can't get a passport without showing your income tax returns. Well, what's that do for those of us that are non-taxpayers? So we can't get a passport. So I guess in legal theory we can't travel. Well, gee, ma'am, if I don't pay your tax, why should I be entitled to your benefit? This passport's a hell of a neat document, so I have to go make my own. I mean, I got to get up in the morning, I got to go out here and spend $20 and buy some paper and a cover and then get a picture taken down at Kinko's. I mean, I got to do something, make my own, because the government won't do it. But I figured for $200,000 a year, I could probably afford to go down and make my own passport. Let me tell you, it only costs you $20 to make one of these.
The photograph that one of the photograph places for the passport and the birth certificate, is that essentially it?
Yeah, I don't have a birth certificate either, ma'am. That's why I'm just an imagination up here. I'm not really here because I'm not here. I'm not alive. I'm just kidding you a little bit. See, that birth certificate is a very valuable document and it gives you a lot of benefits. Did you know you can't go to the public schools or get scholarships and grants without it? That you can't get a marriage license without it? You can't get a social security number without it? Do you know you couldn't enslave yourself without a birth certificate? It's a requirement. If you want to be a patient in the mental hospital, then you got to have a birth certificate. You got a question, sir?
I did. Does that exempt you from getting inoculated?
No, it doesn't exempt me from it, but it gives me the legal basis to hold them off. I mean, these guys would inoculate anything that wiggles, squirms, or moves. If it passes by and breathes air, they want to shoot it full of snake venom and monkey pus. You got to stand firm to keep these guys. They don't care whether you're a citizen or not. Hell, they bring anybody. They go all over the world, don't they? God, they're spending your money over here shooting these little black kids over in Africa full of the snake venom and monkey pus, and they want to make the world safe for disease. No, that's crazy. They want to make the world safe from disease. That's what it is. And so they're out here shooting them all up. But yes, I do have a legal basis for avoiding those shots. This is going to be very important to your immune system as the AIDS virus spreads. How many of you have gotten all of your shots? Oh, you've all... Let me reword that. How many of you in here have never had a vaccination? Hey, have these guys been all pervasive in shooting everybody up? All right, how many of you in here think that these vaccinations are bad for you? Did you know that when you were 8 years old in the public school as they were shooting you up? Did your parents know that? Did they care? You want to keep your children from being vaccinated in 1990? Is it of a concern to you today? And the answer is, it should be. If it isn't, I think most of you probably are aware of the vaccination problem. And yes, under the First Amendment's free exercise clause, you can avoid vaccination. Very easy thing to do. It's really no big mystery. Okay, we have completed round 3. Let's take our lunch break for an hour and a half. It's just 12 now. If you have to check out of the motel, you have till 1 o'clock. So let's take our lunch break, and we'll come back here at 1:30. We'll take up 3 more topics this afternoon. All right, I'm ready to start for the second half. It's about 20 minutes to 2. We'll run for another 50 minutes here before we take our break. Remember, my telephone number while you're finding your seats is 417-273-4967. I live at Post Office Box 297 in Isabella, Missouri. You may want that on the tape as time progresses and the years go by. You may wake up one day and say, gee, I wonder whatever happened to that crazy guy that I listened to out there in Denver, Colorado. I wonder whether or not I should give him a call. When we broke just before, or broke for lunch, we were talking about the income tax, and I pointed out that the income tax doesn't apply to those of us that are engaged in private business. The income tax is a commercial tax on commercial business. When you use Federal Reserve notes, the king comes along and he taxes you for the use of his notes. He charges you a commission. Now, if I didn't use his notes, I wouldn't be obligated to pay him a commission. The problem in America is that all of us have gone to the king's schools, and the king has only taught us the king's commerce. He didn't teach us private business or private trading because he wanted us to pay him his commission off of the use of his commercial notes. Now, there was a time when we first started in 1787, when the Constitution was first formulated, that we used the Spanish milled dollar. Now get this, we didn't have a mint and we didn't have any national currency. What we had was Spanish milled dollars and English pounds and all kinds of those types of currencies and coin of other countries that we used here in the United States. Then in 1792, the Coinage Act came about. And under the Coinage Act, the United States Congress said, well, we're going to mill our own dollars. By this time, the Spanish milled dollar had dropped to 371.25 grains of silver. That was down about 108 grains from a pure ounce. So I might explain this, that an ounce of silver is 480 grains. But it's 480 grains of something. And the fineness of the silver or the purity of the silver or the gold comes into play, and it has to be 999 fine. That is, out of 1,000 coins, you'd have to have 999 pure and then 1 ounce of slag. Well, by the time our Congress got around to creating a dollar, they followed the Spanish milled dollar, but they had continually over the years, that is, the Spanish kings added a little copper to the coins. Now today, they call these circulating coins, but the reason that the king puts copper in the coin is so that, he tells you this, it's so that the coin won't wear out so fast. Isn't that neat? So in the silver dollar, it contains 412 grains total, of which 371 grains are 999 fine silver. So put another way, the coin is about 9/10 silver and about 1/10 copper. They did that to the gold coins, and to this day the $20 double eagle is 9/10 of an ounce of gold, but it's 1 ounce in weight because 10% of it's copper. Now, I've got some coins in my pocket, and these coins are bullion coins, and believe you me, I can take care of these coins, and I don't need any copper in here to dilute the 480 grains that's in the coin. And this is incident to commerce. In other words, the king controls the commerce, takes the commission, issues the money, and then the sucker has got the audacity to water it down. Now, if you were in a bar and you took the whiskey and you put in 10% water, the king would say, well, you're in violation of the Uniform Commercial Code. This is a fraud. You're stealing. But when the king does it, that's okay, isn't it? As a matter of law, gambling is a violation of the law. But when the king runs a numbers racket called a lottery, well, that's okay. But don't let the mafia do it. Don't you do it. But when the king does it, you see, the king can do no wrong because he's the lawmaker. How would you like to be the king? How would you like to be the lawmaker? Pretty neat advantage, isn't it? And that's why when it comes to commerce, the king usually turns into a dictatorial tyrant, because you've heard this old adage that power corrupts and total power totally corrupts. Well, that's what happens. You give the king a little power and it'll corrupt him, and then you give him total power and it totally corrupts the king. But there is another separate body of law called the common law, which is administered by the creator of the universe, which is called natural law. You see, the king has to have a policeman who sits outside the door or sits out on the freeway, and he catches you in violation of a commercial statute. But when you deal with the common law, we have 759 statutes, and they're all automatically enforceable. It's kind of like Flo's whorehouse. You do not need a policeman outside Flo's front door to give you a ticket for adultery, and then to take you before the high priest to give you some kind of a penalty. That's called AIDS, herpes, and VD, and it works automatically, and it's absolute, and it's a capital felony. So for those crimes that have capital felonies, then you have a capital punishment. Now, remember the other day I mentioned to you this concept of Stanek versus White and theft. You got a law that says thou shalt not steal. So when you deal with Federal Reserve notes, you create a theft. And when you steal, the penalty is 2, 4, 5, or 7 times the amount of the theft. That's the fine, and the loss of all your property. So as I pointed out to you the other day, nobody owns anything in the United States because nobody's ever paid for anything. You've always discharged it in equity, and that's a commercial transaction. So commerce requires a license because commerce is a crime. We never needed commerce. What we needed was trade. Now, they use the word trade and free trade and international trade, which is a common law exchange of products, goods, and services among individuals. When you talk about commercial trade, then what we're talking about is the methodology whereby we're going to settle the trade deficit. And that's done with paper. That's a theft. And the use of theft notes in commerce creates a theft for which the issuer of the note becomes the owner of the property, and when you buy something from Kmart, you no longer own it. The issuer of the note owns it. Now, what if I wanted to get into some form of trade that's outside the scope of commerce? This is what private business is all about. So let's take a look at the definition of property. It is the right and the interest which a man has in lands and chattels to the exclusion of all others. It is the sole and the despotic dominion which one man claims and exercises over the external things of the world in total exclusion of the right of any other individual in the universe. Note the words "in the universe." How many of you guys do you know, or how many people do you know out on Mars, Neptune, Jupiter, or Alpha Centauri? See, the definition is so all-inclusive that it includes God Almighty Himself. Because if God owns it, you don't. So therefore, if He owns it, then you don't have property right. So there's only one species of property on this planet that He's reserved. He said, I'm not going to give you the land, because if I did, you'd give it to my adversary, and I don't want you to do that. So I'm going to give you the gold, the silver, the iron, the coal, and the minerals, and the brass, and the product that comes out of the land, but you can't have the source. You can't have the land. Now, if I own something, I have to have the power to destroy it. Now, I claim ownership to this pen. Now, if I were to destroy this pen before your eyes, you've all been trained that that's a waste. What business is it of yours if I destroy my pen? You'd sit there and say, well, you should have given it to this lady. She doesn't have one. So what? What we're dealing with here is a property right, and this is my pen. So I think I'll give it to this fellow. Do you have a problem with that? Doesn't bother you? Thank you. Because the rest of you would say, but wait a minute, he doesn't deserve it. He's already got 6. So I'm going to give him his 7th one. You see, immediately, the socialist philosophy of from each according to his ability and to each according to his need comes into play. Because we've all been trained to be socialists. So we want to be fair, don't we? Wouldn't we want to put all the pens in a pile and then distribute all of the pens equally so that everybody has an equal share of pens? But property rights are not indices to the question of whether or not it's fair or whether or not it's equitable distribution, because this is mine and it's my property, and I hold it to the exclusion of God Almighty Himself, and you don't have a claim to it. So I can sell it or use it or consume it or sell it, trade it, destroy it, do whatever I want with it. Now, commerce comes into play when we're going to reduce this property to something of equal value. And so what they've done is they took the property and reduced it to value instead of weights and measures. Now remember, Leviticus 19:35 and 36 says you shall not have an unjust weight or balance in your bag. So we're dealing with weights and measures. So they came along to us and they said, well, wait a minute, let's reduce these weights to value in commerce. So now, instead of using the gold as the measurement, in other words, I'm going to trade with you with this silver coin and I'm going to take your pen for the silver coin, we reduce it to a value and then I give you the equivalent value. Now the problem with this is that the king controls the value of the note. Now when I was a youngster, you could go into the bank and you could put this on the counter and walk out with the silver dollar. Then they came along and they took that away from us, and now you can take the note in and put it on the counter, and what do you get? Well, in this case, you get 10 more notes, so you could get 10 ones for this 10. But you can never get your weights back. All right, now, something very insidious has occurred. When I was a boy in 1954, it was common knowledge that if everybody in America were to trade in all of their bank accounts, stocks and bonds, and gold and silver, or I mean all of their equivalents for gold and silver, they could collect 40 cents on the dollar, or 40%. So in 1954, the answer was you could get 40%. But in 1900, just 35 years after the Civil War, you could have gotten 100%. But in 1990, what do you think you can get? It's 0% in gold and silver. What you could trade all of your bank accounts for is 3% of Fed notes. That's how the currency system has changed in the last 90 years. In 1900, you could go out and work a day for a contracted amount, and you could walk away at the end of the day with that contract amount in gold. By 1954, you could only collect, that is, all of us together. Now, obviously, there's a few pigs, and I'm one of them. Let me tell you. I have 100% of all of the gold and silver that I'm entitled to. Now, I don't know how much the rest of you have. But in America today, 5% of us own 100% of all of the gold and silver. And I have 100% of my share. I would suggest the rest of you consider this, because in the next lesson I'm going to show you how important this could be to your survival. Today, in 1990, if you took and sold your real estate and you cashed in all your bank accounts and all your credit cards and all of you did it simultaneously, you'd get paid 3 cents on the dollar, and what you would receive for all of it would be these pieces of paper, which are worth how much? They're worth absolutely nothing. In fact, Title 12 of the U.S. Code tells you as a matter of law that a Federal Reserve note is valueless. It has no value. Most people don't even trade in Federal Reserve notes, which are valueless. They trade in checks, which aren't even money. So when you say, I paid the power bill, and I say, how did you pay it? Well, I sent them a check. It's preposterous on its face, because a check isn't even money. And if you said, well, I paid them with a Federal Reserve note, that's preposterous, because a Federal Reserve note is valueless. And there's no way that you can make a claim upon the gold and silver, because that was already hypothecated to the Federal Reserve on May 12, 1933, to pay for the insolvency of your federal government. And that wasn't enough, so they foreclosed on all of the public property in America. This is the Federal Reserve Bank. They foreclosed on all of it. Now here you are in 1990, And as you drive down the street, look off and look at the businesses. I think you'll see a Wendy's and a Burger King and a Standard Station and a Pay and Pack and an Embassy Hotel, etc. Every one of those businesses has a federal tax ID number. They're all partners with the USA Incorporated. They're all partners of the King. Then take a look at the employees in those businesses, and they're all employees with Social Security numbers. They're all partners of the King. None of those people operate in private business. Now let me show you what a public business is, and then let's look at the opposite to that, because I may be the last person that you ever see in your lifetime who operates a private business. You want to take a good look at me because I am rarer than the American bald eagle. And the snail darter is a gigantic species compared to me. I'm almost extinct. When we look at property, we find that it is an absolute right that even God himself can involve himself in. But we go out and we make a down payment on a truck. Let's go in the trucking business. And we make a down payment on a truck, which is the exact opposite when we're dealing with property. Property is something that you trade for quid pro quo and you own. How many people do you think own those trucks driving up and down the highway? The second thing is you got to have a driver. So when the fellow puts a down payment of $5,000 on the truck, he finances it through GMAC. GMAC is the title holder and the state of Colorado is the owner, and this guy has reduced himself to an equitable interest holder in the state of Colorado's truck, which is financed through GMAC. This guy calls himself a trucking magnate. He's in the trucking business now. An independent. Good term. Now, he's the driver who now has to have a state license because this truck is owned by who? Well, doesn't the state then require that you get their permission before you drive their truck? I'd require you to get my permission before you drove my truck. I don't think it's crazy for Colorado to require you to get their permission. Now, you've got one of their trucks. They've got lots of them. And in order for them to keep track of all the trucks that they own, they have to register those critters. So they have VIN numbers. And then we find out that there's people that steal engines and transmissions and rear ends, so they numbered them. And then they make you carry a little piece of paper inside the machine itself so that we can positively identify this truck. That's called registration. And you have to do that every year, so they charge you a little rent on their truck. It's, what did I see the other day, $5,280 in road use taxes, and this guy said this vehicle pays $5,280 in road use taxes. Well, I should expect he would. Driving somebody else's truck on somebody else's road for profit and gain, I should think he should pay a little rent. Would you want some guy living in your house or driving your truck free? Now he has to have insurance because the state comes along and says, well, wait a minute, you're going to drive my truck. Well, hell, my daddy was as smart as the state. When I turned 16, he said, you ain't driving a car until you get a license and insurance. What was he telling me? Hey, kid, I think you're an incompetent, irresponsible, pimply-faced punk, and I ain't going to pay for the damages you caused. Now go get permission from some other guardian and then go hire somebody to be responsible for your actions. Now, my daddy was no dummy. So insurance is called limited liability. The state is saying we don't want to be responsible for your accidents. God, what a legal theory this is. I've always said I want to drive down the street as an unlicensed driver and have one of you licensed guys run into me without any insurance. Who would I sue? I'd sue the state of Colorado. After all, you're their licensee. They're responsible for your actions. Now, do you see why they want you to have insurance on that car? They don't want to be responsible. They're not dumb. Now you go to a load broker to get a load of lumber to put on your truck, your truck, excuse me, GMAC's truck, franchised by the state, and that's a state franchise. And notice that all of these activities here are interstate commerce. You're involved in interstate commerce, and you're regulated and controlled under the Commerce Clause. From the load broker, we take a load which belongs to Boise Cascade, which is a Delaware corporation. Now here you are in Boise, Idaho, loading a Delaware corporation's property onto GMAC's truck, which is owned by the state of Colorado, and you're going to move it to Texas, and you don't want to be regulated and controlled? What kind of foolishness is this? Now we're going to transport this across state lines, and when we get to the Acme company, they're going to sign the invoice. They're not even going to pay you. They're not even going to offer you a $100 bill for the load of lumber. They're just going to sign the invoice and say, thank you very much, take this back to the load broker, and he'll probably give you some compensation for your trouble. Now, this is the way we do business in the United States. This is the typical methodology for doing business as a trucker. And boy, do these truckers get upset when the highway patrol gaffes them and tells them that they want, what do you need, Dean?
I just can't see it, just making up the word, okay.
Okay, Acme building material,
Okay.
transportation. If you need to in the break, you can come up here and I'll let you copy this right out of the book. And if you come to class, I'll give you your own paper. How's that? No, it isn't free. I charge in gold, man. You got to pay me. I'm one of the few guys in America that absolutely demands that he gets paid. That's a wild new concept. I'm trying to infect others with this same concept. You know, if you go out here and give away your labor, that's a depreciable asset. Ma'am, when you were born, you only had 25,550 days of life. Did you know that? That's right. You had a contract for that amount. And every time you give one of those days of labor away, it's one less. And one of these days, you're going to run out.
I'm still sick, I've been doing that for a long time.
You've been stealing from us for years, haven't you? See that? Here's a school teacher. Did you hear that? Well, that's all right, ma'am. We needed somebody over there to steal from us because we were all incompetent. And if it wasn't you, it was going to be somebody else. But I got tired of that, and I didn't want to pay you anymore. Now, this lady's got a real right to be angry with me because I'm not paying these taxes anymore. And now this lady over here is threatened. Did you retire yet? No. You still working? All right. All right, the next issue over here, the next topic, let me read this to you, and I'm going to write this down. It comes from a case called W.L. Thompson versus D.C. Smith. It's a constitutional practice, and it says the natural rights, that is, the use of the public highways and the right of a citizen to travel on a public highway and to transport his property thereon, either by a horse-drawn carriage or wagon or automobile, is not a mere privilege which a city may permit or prohibit at will, but it's a common right which he has under his right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Listen to this. The right of a citizen to travel on a public highway. How many of you travel? Anybody? How many? Hold your hands up. Now, all you people that travel, how many of you have a driver's license? That's like the virgin horse syndrome. Are you a driver? Well, then if you're a driver, you're not traveling. You're driving. But if you're a traveler, then you're traveling. If you're a traveler, why do you need a license? See, travel is incident to liberty, and liberty is a right is a property, and property isn't taxable, but you had to pay a tax for that driver's license. Now, if you're a driver, which I think all of you people are, I don't think you people are travelers. I think you're all drivers. Of those of you that raised your hands and you have a driver's license, how many have insurance? Oh, you're not a traveler, ma'am, you're a driver. And driving is incident to commerce, and insurance, or limited liability, is commerce by definition. Watch what happened to you. First of all, you went down, you bought an automobile. So you walked in, you put $10,000 on the counter at Bob Rice Ford, and you said, sell me that Ford. Bob Rice said, terrific, and he laid on the counter a certificate of origin. Then he said, we've got to register the car. So he took the certificate of origin and sent that to Denver and gave you a certificate of title, which the state sent you later. So you gave the car to the state, so I don't know why people do this, but ma'am, you worked for 2 years, saved your money, bought the automobile, and then donated it to the state. I don't know why people do that, but that's the system. Now, the state owns the automobile, and you have an equitable title. That's called an entitlement. You know what an entitlement is? A right that supersedes mine. I don't have an entitlement or a right to your car. But it's not your car, it's the state's car, and the state now has licensed it to you. In order for you to drive the state's car, you got to have their permission. So they say, come down and get a driver's license. So you come down and get a driver's license, and they say, but we don't want to be responsible for the damage that you could cause George Gordon because he don't have a license. So we want you to get insurance. So you go out and buy insurance, and insurance is commerce by definition. Now, do you see the three stand or fall together? You either have to have the license, registration, and insurance. You can't have the insurance without the license and the registration. Now, I'm just telling you something off the top of my head, but we tested it many years ago. So I took a car in, and I said, I want to insure this car. She says, okay, what's your driver's license? I said, I don't have a driver's license. She said, well, you have to have one. Well, why would I have to have one? I have a 5,000-acre ranch up here, and I'm going to drive my car on this ranch, and I don't need a license. She says, okay, well, then what's the registration on the car? I said, that car isn't registered. And she said, well, it has to be registered or we can't insure it. I said, what the hell's the problem? I've got a 5,000-acre ranch, and I've got 42 miles of road on my ranch, and I want to drive my car on my road on my ranch, and I want to insure it in case I run it off the road and hit a tree. I don't need a license to drive a car on my road, and I don't need to register it because it's off highway. And she scratched her head, and she said, I've never had an application like this. So she went back. She said, what are we going to do? She came back, and she said, why, we can't insure that car. I said, why not? There's not very much traffic on my road. It's a pretty good bet that nobody's going to hit me head on. And she said, I don't know. I don't know. It's just company policy. I said, that's crazy on its face, isn't it? And she said, yeah, it is. Since you bring it up in those terms, it's really crazy. It's because it's commercial. If I had a 5,000-acre ranch and I want to drive my car on my ranch, it's not a commercial venture, and insurance only covers commerce. It doesn't cover private individuals. Try that one. Go down and tell them you want to buy insurance for your car. I don't have a driver's license, and I don't have registration. You can't buy it. We went to Lloyd's of London, and they committed for a $100,000 policy. 3 days later, they sent an emergency wire, and they said, cancel! Mistake! We can't do that. It's because, you see, the state of Colorado bars an insurance company from insuring private property. Got that? Well, that's because, ma'am, you don't have any private property. How many of you in here own any private property? What do you own? What do you own, lady? Yeah. You own a house. Wonderful. Does the bank have a mortgage on it? Did you hear that? She's got a mortgage on the house. And if you don't pay the mortgage, then what happens? Don't you have to pay a little property tax along with that? Got your house insured? Bank wanted you to insure it, didn't they? Yeah, that's what I thought. If you had a piece of property that was off the tax rolls, which there aren't any, but then assuming that it was, you couldn't insure it because then it wouldn't be a commercial venture. Let's try another one on for size. Let me show you about commerce. We had a guy up in Idaho. His name's Pat Conley. He's a pretty unique fella. He wanted to build a house. So he built an $80,000 house in Boise City. He didn't want to get any building permits. Isn't that wild? Hey, listen, this is a building permit county. You got to have a building permit. So there's a principle of law called the good faith effort. So he walked down to the building department. He says, I need a building permit. I want to build a house. And they said, well, right this way. And they gave him the form, and you know the form is pretty long. I don't know if you've ever filled one of these out. They ask you a lot of questions. And so he went down through here and he answered all the questions over here. They had anything to do with anything. But when it said, what's the value of this project, he wrote 0. He got all through with it, and they said, wait a minute, how much is this house going to cost? And he said, nothing. And the lady said, you can't build a house for nothing. That's crazy. And he said, I didn't know. Well, I'm sorry as hell. And she said, well, you got to tell us how many dollars this is going to be. And he said, now watch my lips. no dollars. And I'm going to build a house. And they wouldn't issue him the building permit. You know why? A building permit is a commercial instrument. You see, the legal theory is that the land belongs to the county, and if you're going to build on the county's land, you have to have their permission. It'd be kind of like you own a house over there, and you rent it to me. And one day you're driving by, and I'm busily out here adding a room onto your house. And you stop and you say, "What are you doing?" And I say, "What business is it of yours? This is my home. A man's house is his castle. I've got rights." And I keep working on. Would you get a little upset about a tenant that's adding a room onto your house? And he never even called you on the phone? Would you get a little nervous? Are you building this to any standards? Have you got blueprints? No! Why would I need blueprints? Are you a carpenter? No! Are you an electrician? No! Are you putting the wiring in to any standards? I'm not even going to answer your questions. I got a Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. You see how upset the county gets? Now watch this. Pat's got an equitable interest in this piece of property. He's paying a property tax on it, but he has certain rights attaching to property. Now, he doesn't own the land, but he never claimed to own the land. He just claimed that he had a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's all he needed to claim. And since I've got a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is translated as property. I've got a right to life, liberty, and property. And one of the pieces of property that I want, incident to my right to life, liberty, and property, is a house. It's cold as hell in Boise, Idaho, without one. So he went out and he broke ground and he started building the house. Now the trick to this is, if they ever catch you buying a 2x4 for $1.50 and putting it into this building project, they got you. They watched him for 9 months while he built this house. But see, Pat had already scoped this out. We'd already figured out how to do this. So he bought everything that he needed. And he took it up to his farm in Gem County. He stockpiled it all. Then he went down and he showed the good faith effort. He said, "Give me a building permit, would you?" And they said, "No, we won't do that." Hey, man, this guy's got a right to the privilege. Supreme Court said so. So I said, "Okay, well, now I'm going out and build my house because it's so cold here in the wintertime, so now don't get mad at me. I came down to get my building permit," and he went out, and sure enough, the building inspector came out, and he said, "I'm going to red tag this job." I said, "Okay, I'll go quietly." So he went down to the building department, and he said, "Now the building inspector came out, and he's interfering with my right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness." Well, they took him into the building inspector himself, you know, the big cheese over here. And the guy says, "You can't build a house for nothing." And he said, "Well, by God, I'm going to do it. And if you don't interfere with me, I'll pull it off. But if you interfere with me, I'm going to sue you for interfering with my right to property. Now, I don't care how you handle it over here. I'm going to build a house for nothing. Now, get out of my way, or we'll go litigate." So I took a look at that and said, "Well, gee, what are we going to do?" So I thought, well, I guess we better let him build it. So he went ahead and built it, and here's where they're going to head him off at the pass. How's he going to hook up to the sewer? So he went over to the ABC sewer company, that is the plumber company over here, and he said, "Well, I need you to dig a ditch from my house over here and hook up the sewer." Well, that cost $350. So he contracted in silver with the plumbing company, and he got a receipt from them, paid it law with coin. Then the company came out and dug the hole. See, the company can get a building permit or a sewer permit or an electrical permit. So he hired a subcontractor and paid him in silver. We did this 5 times in California. We went down and bought automobiles 5 times with silver. Got a bill of sale, paid it law with coin. Now you can drive it around without a license plate on it. And you can defend it. Because who's got the certificate of origin? I do. See, I've got the certificate of origin on a couple of my machines over here, or the equivalent there too. That being the case, now it's my property. Otherwise, when the policeman looks at the VIN number, he's looking to see what mental hospital owns this. Next step. Well, he got through that one. So he went to an electrical company and he said, okay, Dick Alloway, and come out here, and he did the same thing with Dick, and Dick hooked it up. But now you got to get an approval from Idaho Power. Idaho Power comes out and they said, we ain't turning the power on because you don't have an electrical inspection. Now what are we going to do? So I went down to Terry Swisher, who happens to be the commissioner of the power, what do they call him, the Public Utility Commission commissioner. And he said, hi Terry, hey, I built a house over here and I wired it myself. And I didn't get an electrical permit because I went down to get the electrical permit and they wouldn't give me one. So I went ahead and wired it, and then I sealed up all the walls in the house so that nobody can inspect it. And now I want you to turn the power on. And he said, well, we can't do that unless unless this is signed off by the electrical inspector. And he said, that's all I needed to hear. How do you spell your name? Terry said, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, I got to sue you. I got to get a declaratory judgment from a federal court. I've got a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and you're interfering with my pursuit of happiness. You and the Boise Electrical Department. So they thought about it for a little bit, and Pat thought, well, geez, this will be a good time to chest this issue over here. But all of a sudden, Terry Swisher called up Idaho Power, and he said, guess you better go ahead and turn power on. Why? Well, geez, if there's no building permit, then there's no requirement to get a plumbing or an electrical permit, because both of them are subservient to the building permit, aren't they? Take a look at your code, and that's what you're going to find out. So if I had a building permit, I would have to have an electrical permit, but if I don't have a building permit, I don't need an electrical permit. Do I? Take a look at your code. He's the only man in America, to my knowledge, has carried that out. Now that's the legal theory behind it, and it's based upon property. And everything that we do is either based upon property or commerce. Let's take a look at a couple of more property rights. We have a man up in Alaska, one of my students.
When we're talking about paying the silver coin, if you are to buy a coin, are they going according to the spot silver price that day, or are they going a dollar coin against a federal note?
No, you're going to have to go down to the gold broker, and Joe the gold broker is going to give you the spot price, and then he's going to take a commission on top of that. Spot price is an arbitrary, imaginary number that you can't buy for. Somebody does somewhere, but that guy's name is Rothschild, and then he sells it at a commission and a commission and a commission until Joe sells it to you. So by the time you buy this coin, let's say that silver is selling today at $5. That's the spot price. I'll have to pay $5.90 for this coin. Somebody's got to get paid for dealing in it.
But when you're paying with that, is that equated to $5?
Yeah, $5.90 or whatever we agree on. Now this lady over here, I agreed at $6 for these. Isn't that what I said? $6. They're not quite worth $6. I could probably buy these for $5.40, but I wanted to round it off. If I'd have paid the full retail price, I'd have paid about $5.90 for this, or $5.80 or $5.70 or something on that order. So they should trade at about what you paid for them, because whenever you sell this, it's a price called seigniorage, and to have this silver smelted, assayed, and then stamped into a corner costs some money. See, otherwise all you had was a chunk of silver ore over here, which is a little awkward to deal with. Now I know what I've got here. So do you. So we have an arbitrary value that's priced daily. I don't set the price. Somebody else does that in London, and then I just go by their numbers.
After he built that house there, for zero value without a permit, the county come along and tax him for improvements on the property?
No, as a matter of fact, there's no tax on the house, only on the land. See, there's no improvements on here because there's a zero value. And watch what happens. Remember I told you the other day that this is an ad valorem tax? See, they come out and they reassess your property, don't they?
Yes.
What are they reassessing?
The house.
The value. Value. That's why it's called an ad valorem tax. They're not taxing the house. The house is property. You can't tax the house. See, what happened was you had a bond issue. How many of you have ever voted for a tax issue? Anybody? You people have tax issues here? I've never heard of such a thing. Well, that's kind of wild. Where I'm from, we have bond issues. So the county comes along and says, we want to build a new high school over here. And they say, we're going to propose a bond issue, and everybody goes out and approves the bond. What nobody ever pays attention to is the terms and conditions of the contract that supports the bond and who's going to buy the bond. Mutual of Omaha comes along and says, okay, we'll buy these bonds for $3 million. Now, what happens if the bonds aren't paid? Don't we have to have some collateral? What does Mutual of Omaha accept as collateral for a $3 million bond to build a new high school?
Taxes.
No. It's not the tax. It's the property. So what you have done is you have pledged your property for 30 years as the collateral for the loan. What does the tax do? The tax is the payment on the bond. You people don't vote for tax issues, you vote for bond issues. You pay the tax to pay the bond. Who collects? The county. How do they apportion it? Mill levy. How do you support the mill levy? Assessed valuation. So the county comes out and says, oh, you added some more valuation over here, so what we're going to do is raise the assessed valuation and raise your prorated share of the tax to reduce the payment on the bond. Now, if at any time you don't pay, the county comes in and sells your house to the next fellow who agrees to pay the assessed valuation. Now, what happens if everybody in the county refused to pay and the county couldn't pay? It's no problem. Mutual of Omaha just comes in and takes your house. It's hypothecated. Hypothecation is a legal term. You're sitting here saying, I own the house. No, you don't. The county owns the house. Well, wait a minute. If the county owns the house, well, of course they do. That's who you're paying the property tax to. But the county hypothecated the loan to Mutual of Omaha. And you've probably seen this done. It's a very common legal practice. You go down and you buy a new stereo, and you finance it through the associates. And one day you wake up and there's a letter in the mail and it says, send your payment to Westinghouse Incorporated, Rochester, New York. How many of you ever had that happen? In other words, the associates sold the note. The associates hypothecated the note to somebody else. It was a transferable note. You've got the same thing when you do business with a bank. FDIC is the real owner of the property by way of hypothecation. The bank that you're making the payment to is simply the company that made you the loan. Now, they've hypothecated the loan to FDIC. When a bank goes broke, does that mean you don't have to pay the mortgage anymore? No. From now on, FDIC sends you the payment schedule and says, send this to Washington, D.C. That's all you're really dealing with there.
So did they crank up his assessed valuation?
No. No. No.
Damn it, they did it to me when I built a house without a permit.
Not supposed to do that. Why don't you go down there and do this? Pat Connolly's a pretty interesting fellow. He did this to him one time. See, you got to be able to sue the bastards. I mean, these guys will do anything they want to you, and what are you going to do about it? They raised your value, they assessed the property, they committed an illegal act, and what did you do about it when this crime was committed?
Paid you increased taxes.
Niggers need to ride the back of the bus. You know that? All right, let's try another one. Pat had a house. When he moved into this one, he moved out of his old one. Well, his old one was sitting on 5 acres, and in the meantime, about 8 years before, somebody built a big subdivision around his 5 acres. He wouldn't sell his 5 acres or 7 acres to the developer. So here is the only guy in this big development, totally surrounded by houses. And, you know, they came along with what they called a sewer bond improvement. Up there they call them LIDs, and LID is a, I forget what the letters stand for, but they call them LIDs, Improvement District. It's a L Improvement District, whatever the L stands for. Well, naturally, Pat voted against it, but, you know, everybody else voted for it. That's the way we can have a sewer going down the middle of Eustick Road. So everybody had to pay $350 and hook their houses up to the sewer district, which is now a municipal corporation of Ada County. Pat didn't sign up and Pat didn't hook up. So what happened was they just arbitrarily determined that a house sitting over here would use this much water, and this much water being flushed down the toilet goes into the sewer, and it's that many gallons, and then they computed the amount, and then over a period of 8 years they added it up, and it was $800 with the interest and late charges, etc. And so when he went to the closing to sell this house for $70,000 or $80,000, there was an $800 lien that had to be satisfied before it could be closed. Everybody familiar with how that works? Hey, wait a minute. We got a legal question to devolve here, or to solve. Who put the lien on the property, and by what authority did you put the lien on? Well, everybody has to pay this tax. Okay, I agree that everybody does, but by what authority did you put the tax on my property? Well, because you're one of the guys that's in the district. And he said, now wait a minute. Who told you that I had any sewage? Well, everybody has sewage. Wait a minute. I don't have any sewage. If I'd have had any sewage, I would have hooked up so that I could dispose of this evil, wicked substance called sewage. But I've only got property. And my property is called night soil. Night soil is the product from human excrement. And that's my property. Now, I'll tell you what I'll do. So he wrote him up a letter, and he said, I propose that we sign a long-term contract for the sale of my night soil. Right now, I store it in a 1,000-gallon tank out behind my house. If you want to buy that from me, I want $1.40 a gallon. And then if you'll guarantee that you'll buy X number of gallons from me, I'll see if I can supply that number of gallons, because that's my property. Well, now, they took a look at that back in their legal counsels over there and took the lien off. Now, do you see what he did? It's against the law for you to have sewage and then fail or refuse to dispose of it properly. It's like garbage. Did you know that garbage is a threat to health, safety, and welfare? Let me tell you, the last thing that you want to have is garbage. So I thought one year I'd like to test this. Let me show you another example of property and garbage. When Boise City was running the garbage company, they did a very good job for $4.50 a month. Every Tuesday they came by and picked up my garbage. Well, one day they sold the franchise to BFI. That's the National Mafia Garbage Company. And I decided that if they were going to sell it to them, it's all right with me, but I don't want to participate, because when Boise City had it, it was voluntary. When BFI bought it, it was mandatory. That means that everybody has to subscribe to the garbage service and pay $4.50 a month whether or not you have any garbage. And I thought, well, now that is a constitutional confrontation. So I stopped producing any more garbage. From that point on, I only produced property. So I'd go to the store and I would buy things like Pepsi-Cola. And I'd come home and drink the Pepsi-Cola, and then I would take the cans and I'd crush them, and that's recyclable aluminum. And then I would have bottles, and I'd take the bottles, and that's recyclable glass. And then I'd take the tin cans and the lids off of bottles, and I'd put those over here, and that's recyclable scrap iron. And then I'd have newspapers, and then that's recyclable paper. You ever heard of that? Yeah. That's property. What would you think if you had, say 3,000 pounds of aluminum cans out in your backyard, and some guy just backed his truck up there and said, hey, we're going to take this garbage and load it up and haul it away? That's what I thought. Well, I was storing all of my property, my recyclables, in one of these 30-gallon containers that some people call garbage cans. I call it a recyclable container. And on Monday night, I would store my recyclables in my recyclable container out on the curb. 6 days a week, I stored it in my garage, but one night a week, I would store it out here. Damnedest thing you ever saw. I'd come out there to go to work, and some asshole would steal my recyclables. It makes you wonder at human nature. Well, this theft went on every week for about 6 months. And one day I got a call from the garbage company. They said they're going to put a lien on my house if I didn't pay my garbage bill. So I sent them a letter back, and I said, thank you very much for your kind letter informing me of the lien that you're about to put on my house and so on. But I said, I'm really surprised. I haven't produced any garbage since the BFI company took over. And I do have some property that has been stolen from time to time, and I'd like to talk to you about it. But please be assured that I have ceased and desisted from having any garbage whatsoever. I only have property. Well, you know how these things go down in the bureaucracy. You get letters, and then you send a letter back, and they send you a letter, and you send them a letter back. And pretty soon, I was sitting in my office, and Peggy said, there's a gentleman out here from BFI to see you. And he came into my office, and I said, sit down. Can I offer you a Pepsi-Cola or something? A little Jack Daniels? And he said, no, thank you. So I'm here to talk about your garbage bill. I said, thank you very much. Glad you came. Sit down. Talk. And he said, well, you haven't paid your garbage bill for 6 months. I said, that's true. I haven't. And he said, well, you have to pay your garbage bill. I said, why would I pay my garbage bill? I don't have any garbage. And he said, why, we pick up your garbage every Tuesday. I said, wait a minute. When do you pick up the garbage? And he said, Tuesday morning at 5:30 on that route. So I came over here, and I'd kept a careful inventory for 6 months. I mean, I had every bottle, every jar. My wife thought I was a nutso. I said, every time you empty a ketchup bottle, you inventory it, damn it. It's property. See, she thought I was nutso. So I produced about 15 pages of inventory. And I went down the inventory, and I said, here's Tuesday, March 14th. I lost 11 pounds of aluminum cans, and I said, this over here. Would you please tell me describe for me how this goes on? Well, the garbage truck drives down the street and it stops and empties your garbage can. I don't have a garbage can. I have a recyclable materials container. I said, damn, you've been stealing from me. I want $640. I demanded $640 for 6 months worth of recyclable materials. And I said, I'm going to report you to the police. What's your name? How do you spell it? And they said, my God, you're serious, aren't you? Well, you have to keep a straight face. I mean, this is law, man. This is. So he said, well, let me go back and talk to my supervisor. So he did. He went back and talked to his supervisor, and he came back and he said, I don't suppose there's any way we could negotiate a settlement for this. I said, yeah, just write me a check for $640. And he said, well, we're not going to charge you anything for picking up your garbage. I said, you never did pick up any garbage. You stole my property. So he said, okay, if you're going to sue us, then I guess you're going to sue us. But we're not going to bill you. And you've never paid a quarter. Remember that. And he's right. I never paid him a quarter, and I never got another bill. So he said, listen, maybe we could work this out. If you don't put your recyclable materials on the curb on Monday night, we won't take it. I said, well, by God, that curb is mine, and I'll store my property any place I want to. And you tell your driver when he gets to 1205 Roosevelt Street, he damn well better keep his hands off it. You know, I lived there for another year and a half, and those bastards stole it every Tuesday. It went up. There's just no way to break a garbage man of a bad habit. Now, I don't know what happened when I left there. I don't know if the new tenants moved in and paid the lien or paid the garbage or what happened over there, but I didn't pay. And that's the distinction between property and garbage, property and sewage, property and automobiles. When you're dealing in property, it's an inalienable right. When you're dealing in sewage, garbage, then you're dealing in commerce, and when you deal in commerce, or if you're dealing in something that's hazardous to human health, I mean, you can't build a big pile of nuclear or radioactive waste out here in your backyard and call it compost because, you know, it endangers somebody's life. But we've had many students test this garbage, sewage, water. I'll tell you one more quick one here.